I want to talk for a moment about Messianic prophecy, but we have an eavesdropper here, Mr. Blick. He wants to learn too. Well, the answer for him is the same as the answer to you, to the question about how we use Messianic prophecy, or at least how we understand it. It's very popular to use Messianic prophecy. Biblically, it's been popular as a substantiation for the Messianic office of Christ. He is the Messiah. How do we know? Because he fulfills the prophecy that was given in the past for him. It's a standard New Testament argument. We find it in all of the Gospels. Very popular, apparently, at the time, or I should say important with regards to Jewish audiences. But this raises a question for us, and that question is, how is it that we know certain prophecies in the Old Testament are really meant to be understood as Messianic prophecies regarding something coming in the future? And the reason this problem presents itself is that when we read the New Testament prophecies that were ascribed to Jesus and fulfilled in the life of Jesus, and we go back to the texts themselves, well, we wonder how it is that the writers of the New Testament were able to divine that these scattered lines, in some cases, from taken out of Psalms or other passages, really were intended by God to be Messianic prophecies, and how is it that we can understand that ourselves? How can we make that judgment when we look back? And there's a couple of responses to this. For one, the New Testament writers had an advantage, and the advantage was that they were inspired by God. Our standard doctrine of inspiration entails the notion that even though these men were writing with their own words and their own styles and their own research, they were still writing precisely what God wanted them to write, and therefore God ensures the accuracy. Now, when God is writing through inspired writers who are reflecting on other inspired writings, it's in a sense God reflecting on God. And so, in virtue of their office as inspired writers, they have an inside look onto the intention that God had originally when he wrote the scriptures. By the way, this argument I'm giving you now is probably not one that's going to be appealing to a non-Christian, but it should help you to understand, given our convictions about what the Bible actually is, how this works, at least in this case, that inspired writers give inspired interpretations. And what I think is going on there is, since the authorial intent is always the point of any passage, and our goal is to try to figure that out, these inspired writers were in touch with authorial intent of Old Testament passages that may not have been obvious to us at the time. That is, when God gave the passage in Psalms or whatever, it might have been the case that he was speaking to a local circumstance, but in that there was a picture of something to come. And this is what God intended at the time. And it does appear that some of the Jewish writers, even around that time, understood this kind of thing. I'll get to that in just a moment. But in any event, that additional intention was not entirely clear in the first writing, and later on was picked up by New Testament authors, and they said, see, this is what was actually going on here. There's something else that's in here that you might not have noticed. The scripture was fulfilled that says thus and so. Back to the Old Testament. There are other passages that don't seem to be messianic to us, that it just seemed at the time were that way to the readers. I think Psalm 22 is an example of this. It starts out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then goes on with a description of what appears to be a crucifixion, a very graphic description of a crucifixion, long before crucifixions were even practiced. And it didn't take the writers or the Jews long to see that this is a messianic psalm, as well as other passages. Isaiah 53 is another example. This is a key, by the way, in studying these. If you can get a handle on ancient commentaries of these passages before Christianity began to have its force felt in the Jewish community, such that now they're defending turf, they're trying to distance themselves from these messianic prophecies that seem to indicate Christ, you'll be surprised at how many of these commentaries actually see these passages as messianic passages, ones that later on were picked up by New Testament authors and by Christians to demonstrate that Jesus was, in fact, the Christ. So you got a mixed bag to sum up. In some cases, we know that these are messianic prophecies because the inspired writers identify them as such, And sometimes we know, because the writers around that time, even though 3,000 years in many cases removed from that, we can't see the connection. They could see the connection, and they wrote about it at the time. And that gives us a little leg up in the process as well.